So this one's going to be very all-encompassing. This is going to be your total roof breakdown. It's probably going to be a two-part series just because I'm going to be reviewing so much material. I'm going to show you what to worry about when it comes to certain things that are going on with your home and certain things you could probably just monitor. And then also, lastly, the things you probably should do something sooner rather than later. And then, of course, your immediate get this fixed. So topics I'm going to be reviewing are going to be your rotten fascia, buildups and what we call dead valleys, your missing shingle versus creased shingle versus actually having exposed felt paper underneath when the shingles are completely gone. I'm also going to touch on peeling flashing versus kick-out flashing versus counter flashing. And then lastly, drip edge, everybody's favorite that everybody loves to talk about because it's only been a coat on for X amount of years. Most roofs we are now installing are going to be adding drip edge. So let's kick it off with rotten fascia. If your fascia looks like what you saw in the beginning, this is something that definitely should be handled, but it's not for the reason you think. Water is normally not going to go around the edge of the roof below the shingles and kick back up. That's extremely rare. Usually only if your gutters are backflowing is that ever going to be a problem. The problem usually comes with it being so soft and rotten that number one, you're going to run into issues when you go to resell the home and then also with critters. So when it comes to critters, once that gap between your fascia boards and your decking is already a little exposed and then that fascia starts to rot and you don't have something called drip edge, you're definitely running the risk of pests being able to chew that soft wood and be able to just get right into your attic. So if it's super rotten, it's not a roofing issue by any means, 9 times out of 10, but it is definitely something you want to get fixed and monitored sooner rather than later. Moving right along, buildup in dead valleys. Dead valleys are just a horrible architectural design in my opinion. It usually comes when you have a square house and where they kick out a garage. I'll actually throw up a picture of my house because I do have a small dead valley on my home. And lo and behold, it was leaking even when I bought the home. They said they repainted and then it wasn't an issue. However, 6 months later, I walked in my garage and turns out it's still leaking. So a dead valley is just a bad build. There's a reason this is a problem. It's because even if the shingles are installed correctly with the proper underlayment, meaning usually leak barrier, which is going to be your peel and stick application, not just your underlayment, even if it's installed properly, if you allow too much debris to build up, you are still going to have leaks. Shingles are meant to shed water. They are not meant to retain it. That's more of a flat roofing system. And even still, you don't want to have a bunch of debris built up on there. So if your dead valley looks anything like this, then that means you probably need to get it cleaned more often than not. You can try to go with just about as often as you get your gutters cleaned, but depending on how much debris you have around your home and what kind of trees you have, there's a good chance you may have to clean this more often than not. I've seen certain cases where there's legitimately plants growing out of the debris that's built up there. That's a bad sign. Not only are you likely to already have a leak going on, if you have plants growing there, plants have roots. Roots are going to grow through those shingles. It's going to cause major problems. So you have a couple solutions. Obviously, cleaning it's the best solution. And then making sure you do actually have leak barrier there. If not, maybe if it's a smaller section like it is on my home, I just had the crew just put a piece of metal. So they did leak barrier underneath that, and then they just went with a straight piece of metal because it wasn't a very huge opening. This may not be feasible when you have, a 4-foot stretch because most pieces of metal are going to be in rolls. So unless you get a huge custom piece of metal, this may not always be the best solution for you. But dead valleys are something you need to be aware of when you buy a home because it is going to be extra maintenance. And I have seen some homeowners want to clean it with a rake, but I caution you be very careful. If it's accessible at all to do yourself, that's great, but use something that's a softer material. Use something like a broom, maybe something with a hook, with something attached to the end of it that's more of like a PVC pipe, something along those lines. I just wouldn't go up there with a rake and continue to keep scraping it because eventually over time, you're going to definitely wear down those shingles. So be cautious of those dead valleys. Next, let's get into shingles. So I hear this a lot. It's just a few creased shingles. It's just a couple missing shingles, not that big of a deal. Well, it depends. A creased shingle is typically not going to lead to leaks right away. A creased shingle just means that shingle is no longer sealed to the one beneath it. So every time the wind blows, it is lifting up. So during a heavy rain, there is a possibility while that shingle's lifted up, those nails that are holding the shingles below it are now exposed. So there is always a possibility if that nail is not down tight, that it is loosened, that you can have a slow leak because of it. Usually I caution homeowners if it's creased, it's not the end of the world. You do have time to get a repair done and scheduled out, or if you are looking for a replacement in the near future, that's also feasible as well. When you have missing shingles, you're going to be a little bit more of a greater risk. Missing shingles means you constantly are having exposed nails, which usually lead to slow leaks. I've seen some pretty disastrous leaks just from a nail hole that is leaking constantly that still has the nail in it. Again, this one needs to ideally have a repair scheduled fairly quickly. If you do have incoming rain, it may be worth considering tarping it, especially depending on how many shingles are missing in a certain section versus if it's just actually one. Lastly, if you have exposed felt paper, this is more of an emergency situation in my opinion. You should have this thing tarped as soon as you notice it. Exposed paper is your underlayment. So you have something called felt paper, there's paper felt, and then there's also synthetic. If you have synthetic felt, you're a little bit better off, but I still caution you, depending on where the nails are driven through that felt paper, there's still a possibility it may leak. And when you see that exposed felt paper, especially on like an older roof, or maybe it's a newer build where they chose to go a little bit cheaper on the materials, it is literally paper felt, which means when it rains, it swells. When it swells, it deteriorates. And when it deteriorates, that water is definitely going to get through, starts to rot your wood. The problem is you still probably won't see leaks right away from this, but once you have rotten wood, it's a much bigger repair than had you just had to swap out a few shingles. So if you have exposed felt paper, which is usually going to look like a brown or a black paper, I only say brown because if it's been like that for a little bit, it definitely is going to lighten up. And now, again, even if you have exposed synthetic felt paper, you're going to be more well off, meaning you may not actually have to replace that felt paper, but definitely check on the inside to see if that water was able to seep through and get to that wood or not. And if it didn't, that's great. You still may only have to do a few shingle repair. Peeling, flashing. So I'm going to put up another photo just so you know exactly what I'm talking about. Peeling, flashing usually occurs on stair-step flashing a little bit more often. Stair-step flashing is very, very commonly and widely used. I see it all the time. Personally, I prefer counter flashing, and there's a couple reasons why. The stair-step flashing, depending on how they do it, it doesn't have as good of a hold, and over time, especially if they use a thinner metal, which a lot of contractors do, it starts to peel. It's very hot in Georgia where I live, and what happens is when heat contracts and expands, as you can imagine, it starts to peel away from the roof, and then it can leave the top of the step flashing that's underneath it exposed. So the application for the stair step and the counter flashing is usually going to be on your masonry or brick surfaces. These surfaces require an extra layer of flashing, because when the home's originally built with the brick and stucco, the step flashing that goes in between, that's laced in between each shingle when you're flashing a roof, is built into it. But most contractors, as you can imagine, don't want to tear out all that brick and stucco just to replace that original. What we usually opt to do is remove whatever we can if it's loose. And then what we do is we face mount whenever we're doing new step flashing on the outside of the brick or stucco. But then obviously you have to cover up that surface. So we put stair step or we put counter flashing. We always opt to do the counter flashing. I like a long straight piece of metal. It's usually going to be a lot thicker than your typical stair step flashing. Most people do that, use something called trim coil, which is thinner, again, bending over time. The counter flashing is not going to bend over time, and it's a longer piece of metal, or you can usually close most runs pretty efficiently, and then you just put a nice bead of caulk line across the top. Just keep in mind it's going to be a little bit thicker. So aesthetically, if you have already had a roof replaced a couple times, you do have to go above the previous caulk line. So if it was like a 4 to 6 inch step flashing or counter flashing before, you do need to go bigger the next time. So sometimes aesthetically it's not the most pleasing thing, but as a contractor, I'm always function over beauty. And I think the counter flashing is typically going to be your better way to go for those specific reasons. Lastly is kick out flashing. Kick out flashing is a code item. And if your home doesn't have it, do not be alarmed. It's not something I would go digging into your shingles, digging into your trim to cut in and add right away. You can usually wait until the roof needs to get replaced the next time. The only exception I would make is if you already have rotting out trim, let's say on the face of some dormers, and you're replacing that wood. If the shingles are in good enough condition, break the seal, add some kick out flashing, make sure you cut that trim about 1 inch to 2 inches off that roof line, and that way you're not having rotten wood again. Lastly is just going to be your drip edge. Drip edge code item, like I mentioned before, it's only been code for about 12 years now. This is something I see on a lot of reports, especially when I'm dealing with the realtors that I deal with. A lot of home inspectors, roofing contractors, they notice that it doesn't have it and they say it is not up to code. This is one of those ones where don't be alarmed as a buyer or seller. It doesn't mean if the roof is in good condition, do whatever you can to add drip edge to the home. If it's on the eaves, that's more of a pest control thing, and I totally understand having to add it. But if it's on the rakes, you got to understand how a roof is built, and trying to just shove drip edge in there just to quote unquote bring it up to code is typically not a good idea. It's not going to look good. The only way they're going to be able to do it properly is if they remove a lot of the nails around the perimeter of the roof, which means you're breaking seals on a bunch of different shingles all around the edge, which is then going to make it more susceptible to wind lift. It's usually a good idea to just wait until that next roof is put on to bring it up to code. So homeowners, roofing contractors, if you see this on an older home, that doesn't mean you necessarily have to bring it up to code immediately. It's something that can certainly be done when the roof is replaced, and it's much easier this way, because what a lot of people tend to do to try to quote unquote bring it up to code is they will try to shove it in there. They'll cut around the nails. They're going to do something called face nailing it, which bends the heck out of the metal, and it's a very unsightly thing to do to a home, and I just recommend not doing it in its entirety. So there you have it, the roof breakdown number 1. Hope this helps, guys. Thanks for watching.